It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. You know, Dolly Parton was so iconic that I'm sure it did not surprise you when the news of her death yesterday wasn't just a big story like in the entertainment media or celebrity sites, right? It was a big story on the news channels. It's on the front page of the New York Times. It was the lead story on All Things Considered yesterday. Did you hear that beautiful 12-minute remembrance right at the top of the show? Very few people get that on ATC, but I suspect none of that probably surprises you. But I was listening to a sportscast on the radio yesterday afternoon where the announcer was giving the headlines and said, this happened in baseball, that happened in football, and Dolly Parton died today. And then last night, I opened a climate newsletter that I read, Heat Map, climate newsletter by Robinson Meyer, who's been on the show, and he wrote, I was planning on writing about a different topic today, and then Dolly Parton died. He wrote, so voluminous and impressive was her legacy that I don't even have to stretch much to find an energy or climate angle in it. For example, he spotlights the lead single off her final album, where the studiously apolitical musician confronted the prospect of a burning world. And he cites the lyrics, now I ain't one for speaking out much, but that don't mean I don't stay in touch. Liar, liar, the world's on fire. What we going to do when it all burns down? And the heat map site added this. Have you seen this yet? It says that in a fluke, the next tropical cyclone to form in the Atlantic Ocean will be named Dolly. So thank you, Robinson Meyer and Heat Map. And isn't that crazy? The names were chosen a long time ago, but the next Atlantic storm, as the liars lie and the world is on fire, the next Atlantic storm, if it becomes a hurricane, will be Hurricane Dolly.
Liar, liar, the world's on fire. What you gonna do when it all burns down? Fire, fire, burning higher. Still got time to turn it all around.
At the end of the show today, we will open up the phones on what Dolly Parton meant to you. But we start here. It's our monthly Call Your Senator segment, my questions and yours for New Jersey Senator Andy Kim. New Jerseyans first priority, but anyone may call or text with a question for Senator Kim at 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Among my topics for him, remember how yesterday was supposed to be Economic D-Day against Iran and any country allowing trade with Iran? We did do a big thing about it on the show. Does anybody think any place feels like Normandy in 1944 today? Also, the senator's new bills to cover all kids with health insurance and more seniors with home care, long-term care for Medicare. And in the interest of funding things like that, what is his Democratic Party prepared to do, if anything, about the $40 trillion national debt? We hit that unfortunate milestone, scary milestone last week. Senator Kim, we always appreciate that you do this. Welcome back to WNYC.
Hi, thanks so much for having me back on, Brian.
Last time you were here, you were just introducing MediKids, universal health insurance for all children in the United States up to age 26. Remind us of the basics, and is there anything new about whether you might get enough Republican votes to pass it?
Well, thanks for raising this again. As we talked about before, I introduced a piece of legislation called MediKids, which would guarantee health care for every child in this country. There are 4.4 million American kids that don't have health insurance, and that's just absolutely abysmal in the richest, most powerful country in the world. So yes, we've been making some good progress. I've been talking to a number of my colleagues. Right now, we're not in session, so unable to have as many of those as I'd like now, but we've gotten several more senators on board. We are continuing to spread the word, and just largely what it's doing is exactly what we wanted, which is sparking a national discussion about guaranteed care, especially for our kids at a time when we're seeing more and more challenges for children when it comes to health and mental health. This would provide mental health coverage. It would provide dental coverage, vision coverage. As kids are going back to school, I'm hearing from teachers and parents that are talking about all the strains that come with healthcare for our kids. So I've been really blown away by the support and the interest in MediKids over the last couple weeks.
Yeah. But since you introduced it last month, I have been looking to see if this kind of really blows up as an issue. Like as Democrats try to win the congressional majorities in the midterms, I wondered, is this going to become a defining campaign talking point? It's not Medicare for all with all its controversial aspects. We're
Yeah.
just for universal health care for American kids. I thought Democrats might start saying, well, the other party is not. But I don't see it catching on in that way for candidates. Why do you think
No,
not?
I've
Or
seen
am
it.
I missing it?
No, I've seen a number of candidates referencing this, but right now, we're in the thick of the election, and the election right now is a lot about this referendum on Trump. Now, as I said, I do want this to be something that is raised as a vision for what it is that we want to accomplish. So, where I'm setting this up for is when we hopefully take back gavels in the House and the Senate as we flip the majorities. I want this to be one of those top bills that the next Congress pushes on. So that's been my effort, has been focused on lining this up for legislation. I designed this not to be a messaging bill, but to actually be implementable. And so that's the broader push right now. And there is a very active debate and discussion right now about what we would do with having the majority in Congress, which we absolutely need to have a strategy and a plan on to address the affordability challenges of families and so many other issues that are out there.
Listener writes, hey, Senator Kim, why not just get on board with Medicare for all?
You look, I'm very supportive of universal health care. And if we can do it through single payer, through Medicare for all, I'd be supportive of that. But what I think right now, when I'm thinking through what we can pass through a very divided Congress right now, about also putting forward our strongest argument when it comes to guaranteed care, which I think is one that would be very difficult for others to be able to fight against, and also just widening that coalition and be able to bring more
Right.
Democratic colleagues of mine on board with the idea of guaranteed care. I think we're moving the needle forward to that universal care that we need.
Because there's always more political sympathy for kids. And I just see last week, you in the Senate and Congresswoman Debbie Dingell in the House introduced your bill called the Medicare at Home Bill to establish in-home long-term care services as part of Medicare for seniors with disabilities. That kind of care has never been in Medicare. Explain what Medicare at Home would be.
Absolutely. So while I am the father of a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old, so I think a lot about healthcare for kids, which I channel through MediKids Act. I'm also the son of an Alzheimer's patient. My dad has Alzheimer's. It's been excruciatingly difficult as he's been descending and all the challenges with that. It's also been, really financially catastrophic for our family and for millions of other families that are out there. Right now, we have 7 million people with Alzheimer's. We expect that to go to 14 million in the next 2 decades. Many, many more with dementia and Parkinson's and other degenerative diseases. We are not ready for this as a country. We are not prepared at all in terms of the care we can provide for our loved ones, but also financially, this could very much bankrupt our country. So, what I'm trying to do is get ahead of this. I'm a big believer in that Gretzky skate to where the puck is going. And where the puck is going when it comes to our healthcare in this country is terrifying. And so I'm trying to be able to provide more care, more accessibility to more and more families, especially when it comes to at-home care, which is by far the preferred venue for care for aging Americans. But it's also so much cheaper. And it's something that can be so beneficial on a number of fronts. But right now, Medicare doesn't cover so much of what is needed. And that's what the Medicare at Home Act does. It provides greater amounts of care for different things that are needed for people who can't handle and do the daily activities of their life, like getting in and out of bed, providing services in those types of ways for food and for housekeeping, to be able to just make sure that they can be able to live a life of dignity and decency as they age.
A Wayne Gretzky hockey clip reference was not what I expected in this segment, but there it was. But in terms of looking where the puck is actually going, listener writes, trillion here, trillion there, starts to add up. So Medicare and Social Security are already the most expensive things the federal government spends money on. How much, and I know you just claimed it would save money, but how much would this cost Medicare at home, and how would you pay for it?
Yeah, so we're still working through those numbers just because there's a lot of calculations. Because as I said, if we can have more and more people stay at home, we actually can save a lot in terms of overall healthcare costs, in terms of what Medicare and especially Medicaid is paying out. So I understand it's an investment, but it's one that I think will benefit us in the long run. And that's what we're trying to calculate out right now, because just putting someone in a nursing home is exorbitantly more expensive, multiple times more expensive. And as I said, we also just don't have the number of facilities as we see in aging society. So look, I get it, I understand, but what's the alternative here? Having millions of aging Americans with significant degenerative diseases unable to access any type of care. We will see an explosion one way or another in Medicaid then, as more and more families have to basically bankrupt themselves to be eligible for these services. Why not bring it further in to be able to prevent that type of financial catastrophe for millions of families? And again, one way or another, we're going to pay for this, and it's better to do it in a way that is cheaper and frankly more desirable.
Another listener asks in a text, can you ask about saving Social Security without cuts or means testing? And just by way of background, for listeners who don't know, you've seen the bond markets react to the news last week that the national debt hit $40 trillion for the first time. Mortgages and other interest rates are up. 20% of the government's budget now goes just for interest on the debt, I saw. And Trump and the Republicans who are in control continue to spend more on each year's spending programs than the government collects in tax revenues. But is your party, the Democrats, proposing anything to address this before it becomes a financial crisis, or the elderly programs we have to be means tested or cut, as the listener points out?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that we need to be able to push forward on. For instance, I'll give you a specific example. The listener raised about Social Security. It would be absolutely a dereliction of duty if the Congress and leadership in the executive are unable to be able to solve this problem, and we see cuts to benefits and other types of reductions. That would be absolutely horrific, especially given the affordability challenges that we have. One clear thing that we could do is, for instance, right now we see the cap in terms of the FICA tax when it comes to Social Security at $184,500. We can lift that cap and ensure that those that are earning more money in this country are going to pay their fair share, rather than just capping it and giving them a break on that front. That's something that could immediately, overnight, really be able to help so many people be able to also just increase the ability to have solvency for Social Security. So that is a plan on the books, on the idea of raising that, allowing that cap to come, allowing for the tax to come back in for incomes above some amount, around 400,000 is one of the proposals that's out there. So those earning more than 400,000, that they would have to pay into Social Security again for that type of income. And that is something I think is very reasonable. It's fair, and it's something that I think can put us on the kind of path to be able to ensure the solvency of Social Security. So that's a very concrete example of what we're trying to push forward on, that would be able to ensure that benefit for so many millions of Americans.
And a partisan difference right there, because I
presume
exactly. Very few Republicans support that kind of tax the rich proposal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But they give no alternative to what we can do when addressing Social Security. And, I still hear, whispers through the Capitol from the Republicans about privatizing Social Security or other aspects. And again, that just undermines the very nature of having this benefit there as a foundation. When we think through just how many seniors were living in poverty prior to Social Security. I mean, it was absolutely insane, double-digit numbers. And so, yes, do we still have challenges when it comes to seniors and poverty and affordability? Yes, but we need to make sure we're trying to close that gap
Let,
rather than widening it.
let me turn the listener's question on its head. Why not means test Social Security? Like for people who've got fat 401ks or healthy pensions in their retirement, why not move some of that money out of their pockets so it's solvent for everybody else?
Oh, look, the thing about Social Security, it's an earned benefit. We pay into this. That is part of the contract that we have with one another on that front. So look, like we want to make sure that that there is that sense of responsibility, that if you pay into it, that you have a sense of what you're going to be eligible for, and just to be able to make sure. And like, look, we do try to make sure that people are able to get a fair amount, and especially be able to live off from. So yes, for those that are on the lower spectrum of financial support, we're trying to make sure that they're getting, at least be able to have that foundation that they can build off from. But
Here,
when it comes to overall, like I think what we have has been working. We just need to make sure that we are increasing the cost of living adjustments, that we are continuing to grow with the level of costs that are out there, as well as being able to ensure its guarantee so people can plan around it, so they don't have to worry whether or not it's going to be there for them, which a lot of a lot of not just seniors but a lot of younger Americans are worried, myself and others. Our
sure.
generation, we're wondering, is it going to be there for us, just given the trajectory that we see right now? And that should never be in question.
Here's a constituent with a healthcare cost question. Danusha in Patterson. You're on WNYC with Senator Andy Kim. Hi, Danusha.
Hi, I'm low income and I have been told before healthcare procedures one cost, and after it takes place without any changes, I'm given a different, much higher cost. And I've tried to contact your office and other elected officials and no one has responded. Do you have any suggestions for me?
Yeah, well, Danusha, thanks for raising it, and I'll absolutely make sure that we're getting back to you. We very much pride ourselves in being able to respond to constituents about their needs. When it comes to the federal level, we can certainly try to engage in your particular case and see why it is that there wasn't that type of consistency in the price. But I'll be honest with you, like we're seeing that all over the country, and this is one of the biggest problems with healthcare, is that you can't get a sense of what something costs beforehand. I had to do a procedure and I tried to just call a number of different facilities to see how much it would cost. And every single one of them was like, well, it depends. Depends on your insurance, depends on the negotiations. And that lack of price transparency is where so much of the problems are when it comes to our healthcare, and why we can't have a system that gives that sense of assuredness to patients about what's going to come out of their pocket. So absolutely, we've been pushing, and we passed legislation that would stop surprise billing. There's still more implementation issues we need to do on that front. And there is a bipartisan group of members of Congress that are pushing for greater price transparency when it comes to procedures, when it comes to prescription drugs and others. So know that we're pushing in that direction. But when it comes to your specific case, absolutely, we'll make sure I circle back up with WNYC, see if we can get your information and see what we can do to help.
Yeah, we'll get that to you from Danusha off the air. We'll continue in a minute with our monthly Call Your Senator segment with New Jersey Senator Andy Kim, 212-433. WNYC, call or text your senator from New Jersey or anywhere else, honestly. And we're going to turn to new developments today in the Iran war, among other things, in a minute. Brian Lehrer on WNYC with our monthly Call Your Senator segment. My questions and yours for Senator Andy Kim from New Jersey, 212-433-WNYC, call or text. Hey, I want to ask you about something that's just breaking this morning, and I'll understand if you haven't even seen it yet, because it came out just before we went on the air. There is a New Jersey angle. The out-of-court settlement by Meta with New Jersey's Attorney General and other states' AGs on the harms to minors from Instagram and their other platforms. It's only $16-17 billion, which is tiny compared to their revenue. And I saw Meta stock was up 6% just before we went on the air on this news. But the deal does include some new preventive measures. CNBC says they include daily usage limits and nighttime blocks for teenagers that use the company's apps like Facebook and Instagram, enhanced age blocks. What else? I said the enhanced age blocks already. I'm going down this list. Also, enhanced age assurance measures that would prevent children from using the apps and making additional tools for parents and guardians, I guess settings. Any reaction? I'm seeing some early outrage over the states not forcing this to trial to get much more from a likely friendly jury in California.
Yeah, thanks for raising this. I'm also digesting this, and look, we'll see just exactly what the details are in terms of what was agreed to, but it really hits home, just something that's at the top of mind for so many families. I just talked with a woman yesterday from New Jersey who lost her daughter when it came to just online bullying and just just the other challenges that come with mental health for kids. It was really, really tough to hear, and just really hits home why we need to be taking real action. And I just applaud her and so many others who have been advocates pushing on this. In the Senate, we are so close to being able to get across the line landmark legislation, the Children's Online Safety Act and other pieces of legislation. I have a bipartisan piece of legislation called the Digital Age Assurance Act, which would very much be complementary to these other efforts like COSA to be able to ensure that we have age verification when it comes to kids and what they can access, that we have, we do everything we can to ensure that the content that they're seeing, especially when we're seeing, algorithmic content, just putting more and more extreme content before the eyes of not just our kids, but all of us, just in a way to just try to keep eyeballs on the screens, things that are just not good for any of us when it comes to our health. So that is something that we're trying to push. I hope that, I'll look at the details. I hope there's something meaningful here that we can do that's going to change things. But it has to be for all companies, not just for Meta. We need a single standard across the entirety of social media when it comes to our tech platforms that are out there, that is going to put our kids and our parents first in terms of being able to determine and control what is coming before our kids. And I say that again as a parent of a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old. I'm having that conversation with my wife about, do we get them, when do we get them a phone? Do we get them a smartwatch in the meantime so we can at least have some communication? But we're very nervous about all of these steps right now.
We have a call on this topic, so let's hear from Robert in Newton, New Jersey. You're on WNYC. Hello, Robert.
Hi. Thank you very much for taking my call, Senator. The question I have is regarding how you're planning on balancing individual privacy and civil liberties with online age verification. So, for example, when I grew up when the internet was just first coming along, and it was never put any information you want on the internet, and now it seems as though we're moving in the direction of we need to verify our ages online. So really the question is, how do you balance that personal privacy and civil liberties with the age verification?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is why I was pushing on the Digital Age Assurance Act approach, which would be a platform-based, so an operating system-based verification so that it's not something where every single website and app you go to, you have to plug in and verify, and therefore your information is further exposed to more and more companies, and that we can have restrictions and efforts be able to put in place where it is stored, that they cannot use it for certain purposes. That we can also ensure that, for instance, the legislation has efforts in there that would prevent the selling of this data, especially for kids, to data brokers, trying to make sure people aren't profiting off of the data of our kids and our family. So, this is something I worked with, senators both sides of the aisle, including Republicans, Senator Lummis and Barrasso, both of which have been strong champions of privacy and ensuring that we are not giving up our information in ways that we can't control. So I just want to say and ensure that that's certainly been my focus as well. Making sure that we can protect our data. And I don't think that it's mutually exclusive to our efforts to be able to protect our kids.
Let's turn to the Iran war. Yesterday was supposed to be economic D-Day against Iran. President Trump called it, and any country allowing trade with Iran in major ways. There was a big build-up to a news conference by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent yesterday, but when he got to it, it sounded more to a lot of people like potential hypothetical threats more than anything that resembles an economic Normandy 1944. Here's a representative 9 seconds.
Every country has a defined timeline to shut down activities we have identified. If they do not take action, we will do so unilaterally through Treasury authorities.
So defined timeline, meaning this is still a threat for some unstated point in the future. Some news organizations are calling it underwhelming. Not that you necessarily support the idea of an economic D-Day, but what's your understanding of what economic D-Day actually brought?
Well, first, it's just a trampling of the legacy of our actual heroes of D-Day and what they did to be able to defend our country. Just trying to latch on to their honor is absolutely wrong for the purposes of just this PR campaign that really does not have the level of teeth to be able to give us a sense of what's going to come next. First of all, Brian, if they had these tools ready to go, why didn't we start with this? Why didn't we start with a greater economic pressure rather than sending our service members into harm's way to start with? As someone who was embedded with military, as a diplomat before, worked in Afghanistan and Iraq, sending our troops into harm's way should be an absolute last resort. And the fact that this just shows just more of they're just making it up as they go along. There's no strategy. And this has clearly been a deep strategic failure. So they're trying to flounder and figure out a way out of this. And again, using, the honor of our fallen soldiers from World War II to try to give them some cover and make it seem like they're doing something big. But we know that if they actually want to take this on in a meaningful way, that they're going to have to stand up and put down significant restrictions, for instance, on countries like China. And we have Trump has invited President Xi to the White House in less than a month. Is that really something that's going to happen? And we certainly saw that the list of entities that Bessent put out there is seemingly missing a lot of the major financial actors of China. So we just, everyone sees through this. They see through. There's the constant bluster of Trump. Yes, it will take some actions on this front, but I just think our credibility is at such an all-time low, and I certainly hear that from colleagues in Congress, but also from leaders and officials from other countries that have been telling me about this.
Do you want more economic pressure on China? I was looking at one of the South Korean news organizations today that's concerned about the impact on South Korea if the U.S. really ramps up the economic pressure on China as an Iran trading partner. And with your family background as well as general interest in foreign affairs, Do you want that economic pressure? And, does this praise related issue of authoritarian North Korea, which has long-standing close ties with Iran, and criticism of the democratic South because it's not getting more involved in the war, is that just truth social theater?
Yeah, but look, the statements that Trump had the other week, praising Kim Jong Un. I mean, it was just insane. It was literally crazy. I had to ask my staff to verify that is actually the language of the tweet. It wasn't some AI generated. We have a long-standing strategic alliance with South Korea, with other countries, including Canada, and now look at where we're at when it comes to that. Meanwhile, Trump has not been levying the pressure on Russia, for instance, when there's so much more we could be doing to press on Russia with sanctions, especially their shadow fleet. So again, when we're seeing Trump cozying up to many of our adversaries and competitors and going after our allies and our partners, it just puts us in such a weak position. When it comes to
squeeze
China, on
China
your question
more.
there,
Go ahead.
let me just address that real quick. We need to be smart about it. It's not just about throwing every single economic pressure tool that are out there. For instance, I introduced a piece of legislation called the Match Act. It's bipartisan legislation that would put in export controls when it comes to semiconductor chip manufacturing. We all know that the semiconductor chips are the keys to be able to generate the AI power that's out there. Why would we be giving China the tools to make the chips on their own? And so, that is something that we've been pushing. We've been making great progress. That's a smart use of our power, of our efforts to be able to work with others on something that is particularly meaningful. Just kind of doing broad brush across the board for every single competitor and adversary, it doesn't make sense. But again, neither does tariffing our closest allies and partners and just making the American people pay for it. None of this makes sense.
Well,
and you don't need to be someone who's worked in national security for a career like I am to recognize this. That,
I want to
people
touch
back home in New
one
Jersey
last thing before we run out of time in 2 minutes. I see you were at the Delaney Hall Immigrant Detention Center in Newark last week doing oversight after the uptick in medical emergencies, including deaths there in recent weeks. Can you tell us some of what you saw there?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Brian, for raising this. I mean, it just, I've been there so many times to Delaney Hall, and nothing's getting better. We've now had multiple instances of deaths of detainees, and I talked to the doctor, I talked to others, and they're continuing to say that they're doing everything just fine. I'll give you one example. I asked them, is there some specific ratio, the number of physicians to the number of detainees? As now they have over 884 detainees at Delaney, and they were just like, all of them were just like, they're shrugging their shoulders, like, I don't know, like, I don't think so. And it just kind of shows, like these are people not just being held there; they're under tremendous physical and mental stress. One person I talked to has been there for over 10 months, still no clue when he's going to have his time in
So
court.
what more can you do about it than you're already doing? Many people say the Democrats can ramp up more pressure than you are, acts of civil disobedience, or I don't know what.
Well, look, I think people understand the role that I played at Delaney Hall in stepping up and putting myself, between ICE officers and my constituents. I'll continue to do everything that I can through legislative means, as Senator Booker and I have pushed forward legislation to close Delaney Hall. Republicans, of course, voted it down. We're going to continue to shine a light through these inspections as I'm working in a coordinated, strategic way with the rest of my delegation, and just continuing to put the pressure. I'm now, seeking medical records alongside the families to try to be able to counter some of the claims of ICE and say, ICE cannot just wash their hands of this when they send a detainee out to the hospital and say, oh, they died out there, that's not on us. That's absolutely wrong. So look, we've been pushing. This is something that led to a government shutdown because of the lack of accountability and the unwillingness of Trump and the Republicans to have any accountability, whether inside a detention facility or out on the streets in Maine, in Minnesota, in New Jersey. This has to end. We need Delaney shut down. We need real accountabilities when it comes to what is happening. And we're going to keep fighting for that. And that's what people should be thinking about when they head to the polls in November.
We are out of time for our monthly Call Your Senator segment with New Jersey Senator Andy Kim. Thank you for the time today, as always. Talk to you in September.
Yeah, thanks so much.